panel is on working with reviewers, and there's a whole lot that goes into this. But first, I'm going to let our panelists introduce themselves, and I'll start with Janci here.
I'm Janci Patterson. I have a bunch of young adult novels out. Now I'm getting into adult romance, and I have a series called The Extra that comes out in May. And I'm also currently working on writing the last book in Brandon Sanderson's Alcatraz versus the Evil Librarians series as a collaboration.
My name is Melanie Nichols, and I publish under my initials, M.A. Nichols, and I have write under a few different genres. I've got a young adult contemporary fantasy series. I've also got an adult fairy tale satire series that's Princess Bride meets Once Upon a Time, and then I recently broke into historical romance, and I've been focusing on that recently. I actually also have experience as being I don't know if you call it professional reviewer, but I used to, back when I had time to spend a lot of time on Goodreads, I was a top-rated Goodreads reviewer for a couple years.
I'm Emma Hoggan, and I'm sorry I forgot my name today, so you'll just have to, remember that. I am the managing editor with Future House Publishing, so we do fantasy and science fiction, middle grade, young adult, and adult. And so I have worked with reviews coming from, the publishing house and kind of that sort of end of things.
Okay. I'm David Farland. I'm a writer of science fiction and fantasy. I've written for middle grade, young adults. Also done a little bit of historical fiction and nonfiction.
All right, so the first question, you can just I'm louder. So the first question that I want the four of you to tackle from your perspectives, from your various unique perspectives, is to you, what is the greatest importance for reviewers with what you do? Well, you start, Janci.
Okay. My most recent books are indie published, and so this is going to sound really cold and calculating, but the most important thing for reviews for me is for the Amazon algorithm. The truth is that the more reviews a book has, the more prevalence Amazon gives it in their algorithm, the easier it is for readers to find. And so I don't actually care what my reviews are, if they are 1 star, if they are 5 star, it does not matter. What matters is that there are as many as possible.
Ditto. Reviews are really important, not just for selling the book. Personally, I'm also indie published, and I really like the feedback, honestly, because even though I do go through the critique process, I have beta readers, I have an editor, I go through all of that. It's always good to hear feedback from the readers, because there are times when you start seeing a pattern with reviewers that they point out not necessarily massive flaws in my stories, but they may point out things that I need to work on a little bit more for the next book, or that kind of thing. So I also like reviews just from a writer's perspective. And I guess probably easier than trying to get over it every time.
So coming from a small publishing house, I completely agree. Like, you just want as many reviews as possible up on Amazon, like as soon as the book comes out, because it's a lot of free marketing, and that's great. I will disagree a little bit about the positive versus negative reviews, because Amazon reviews, it's either a 1 star or a 5 star. It's not like Goodreads where people like a book like this %. It's like the worst book that was ever written, or like everyone needs to have read this. So finding reviewers who actually like the kind of books that you're doing is helpful to keep those ratings up, because if it's a 5 or a 1, then if they like the genre, then you get 5s a lot more often. So
I think that different reviews can carry more or less weight, For example, if I'm looking for reviews for cover quotes for a book, I very often will I want to find an author who is in my industry, writing to that audience, and who's a big name, who basically is willing to say, yeah, if you like my stuff, you might like this book. Or I also look for awards, do roughly the same thing. And I also, of course, I want the best review that I can get from that person or from those kinds of people. But ultimately, I think that what I want is I just want to get as many good reviews as I possibly can. I think that every time that a reader sees that you've won an award or reads a good review, it wears away a little bit at them so that they are more and more willing to buy. And I remember, for example, years ago reading Robert Jordan's first book in the Wheel of Time series. And I opened it up and there were some reviews on the inside front cover, and there were about 40 of them. And I got down to about 10 and I said, oh, heck, I'll go ahead and buy it then. Just because there was just such an overwhelming number of good reviews from authors that I admired.
So to go along with that then, it sounds like what's being said is that a good review, if you're a reader, for example, or if you're the author, a good review can help kind of massage away, I guess, some of the perceived flaws that could be seen in your fiction. Is that accurate to say?
I think I'm just trying to wear them down enough so that they'll buy it. When Brandon Sanderson and I first started doing book signing tours together, I think we went to our first bookstore, and we put our books out on a table, and people started coming up, and they'd say, "Oh wow, Dave Farland, I've really loved your stuff. What are you here selling today?" And I'd say, "Oh, I'm here because Brandon Sanderson has his first book out, and I absolutely loved it." And they're like, "Well, wait a minute, what about your book?" "No, I was here to talk about Brandon's book." It's really easy to sell somebody else's book, and people would buy it, and then they'd say, "Well, what about you? What are you doing here?" "Oh, I really love Dave's first book." We'd sell them, both. But I think that just getting a credible review from somebody that you know is important, which is why those reviews from real customers are so important, because their best friends are going to say, "Well, okay, Joe really loves this stuff. I want to buy a book this year. I'll go follow his advice."
Yeah, go ahead.
I think that Dave's getting at something really important here, which is that reviews are not for you, they are for your customer. A critique is for you, and if you are an author who can read your reviews and get feedback from them, that's wonderful. But I don't read my reviews. I never ever read my reviews, and for most starting authors, I would suggest that you never ever read your reviews, because they're not for you. They are for your customer. And so when you see bad reviews, first of all, the more your book gets read, the more bad reviews you will get. And I was being a little bit facetious when I say I don't care if they're 1 star. I don't want all 1-star reviews, right? But I don't worry about getting a few, because the more people read, that means people are reading it, people are accessing it, who it was not necessarily intended for, and that means you have reach.
From a reviewer perspective, when I review a book, there are a lot of factors that go into this. And so, who here wants to be a professional reviewer? Yeah, right? No, exactly. Shoot, there's a joke that Larry and I have. In one of Larry's books, I get red-shirted in a lot of books. It's people's favorite pastime is to murder me on the sly, right? So, in one of Larry's books, he murders me. I'm a telekinetic in one of his books, and he murders the shit out of me. He just kills me so hard. And my character's last line, after he has been just stabbed over and over and over and over by ninjas, is, "Well, it's better than being a book reviewer." Okay? No one wants to be a book reviewer, right? You want to write books, you want to read books, okay? But reviewers are important because of all the reasons you're here. Now, if I'm writing a review, a good reviewer will, and I'm totally good, a good reviewer will write their opinions on the book, talk about the perceived strengths and weaknesses of the book, but will usually have a caveat in there that says, "But look, this is." Every reviewer has a personality. Every reviewer has a certain thing they do or don't like, and that may or may not be your book. But even if I one-star review a book, I'm just like, "Man, this book is trash." But I mean, that's because I like these things. If you like these other things, maybe this book is for you. And a good review, even if it's a 1-star, can actually help in some cases, right? Or if it's the 1-star troll review that's like, Moby Dick, totally not what I thought this was gonna be about, right? Then it's about a whale. So they...
I expected erotica.
Then, you know, there's a humor to that people will go, okay, whatever. And then they'll pick it up anyway. Okay, that's the reviewer point. Okay, so for the 4 of you, when you want to approach a reviewer like me, what's the thing that you do? How do you get my attention so that I will read your book and give it a review, good or bad? How about you, Melanie? Let's start.
Okay.
Yeah, put you on the spot.
Well, honestly, I don't actually hunt after reviews all that much anymore. When I was first starting off, you're not selling that many books. You're struggling, because reviews will come organically as you sell books, but if you're not selling many books, it's hard to get those organic reviews. And when I first started off, I was reaching out to book reviewers, professionals, and I had a very nice email that I would put together. I usually spent a lot of time going through their website, because most book reviewers have a website. I would look at some of the books that were maybe like my book, that they enjoyed, or a book that I also enjoyed, or I would go through a few of their reviews, and I'd start off by saying, oh, I loved your review on such and such a book, and I really agree with you on this, and made it a fan mail to begin with, and something to connect with them on an emotional level and a personal level. And then I'd say, well, and by the way, I'm an author, and I have a book that I think you might enjoy because you enjoyed these other books, and then I give the synopsis and then send it out there. And I would keep a spreadsheet of all the different reviewers I reached out to and whether or not they responded to me. And sometimes I would follow up and just I'm like, I don't know if I should call on people or not. That's kind of your job. Yeah,
what's up?
When you send it out there, do you send them a free copy of your book, or how do you do that?
I only send it once they've requested it.
Please don't ever send a reviewer a book that they did not ask for, unless you're like the head of Bain. And then you can send me whatever the hell you want, because you're Bain. But look, if you're just an author and you're either traditionally published or indie published, or some weird hybrid in between, do what Melanie's saying. Okay? What she's saying here is something that almost no starting author will do, and it's something they should do.
I actually did something right.
There's an inherent professionalism in what she is talking about. The more professional you are with the reviewer, the more likely they are to say, okay. And it might kind of wear away a little bit, and they might overlook some of the perceived issues in your book. The more professional and courteous and nice and kind and awesome you are, the more I'm likely to go, but it's a first book. It's fine, or whatever.
Well, and frankly, you need to show them that you actually care about them. Yeah. If you're cold calling them, basically, you're just reaching out to them and say, well, this is my book, read it, please. Even if you're really nice about that, you're not going to get as much response.
Yeah.
Another question.
Yeah. At one point, can we go over how to actually find reviewers?
Sure.
Google is your friend.
Google.
Well, and I will point out, too, that most good professional book reviewers will have a spot on their website that you can look up and see, first off, what they accept, what they don't accept, how they want you to reach out to them. Some will say, just go ahead and send it to me. Most don't. They will also tell you, they should tell you, too, if they want hard copies or ebooks, and do your research. Don't just sit there email out 30 book reviewers with just a blanket, this is what my book is, please, read it. personalize it. Show them that you've actually put some effort into it, and that gets, even if they don't want to review your book, I found that more often than not, they will say, contact me the next time your book comes out, another book comes out, or I'm too busy right now, but I would love to do your next one. And it definitely builds a rapport with them and a bit of a relationship.
We're also talking about that the best way to get reviews is organically, but you can do some things to move that along. If you're indie published, you're in better control of this. You need to have a link at the back of your book so that when someone finishes your book, they can just push it and leave you a review. Amazon has their own, but you need to have one where you ask nicely and say, this really helps me out. Another thing, after a couple weeks after my book comes out, I always get back on social media, all the places where I announce the release, and said, hey, if you read it, would you leave me a review? This really helps. Because people won't necessarily think of it themselves. And they might get to the link at the back and be like, I'm hungry, and go eat something and forget. And so you don't want to ask every day, you don't want to be obnoxious, but if you politely ask at regular intervals, then you'll get more reviews than if you don't.
Yeah, I want to hear what you have to say. Yes, you have.
Okay. So I think there's several different kinds of reviewers that you are working with, and so going back to the original question of how you approach them, it's going to be really different. So if you're trying to get a really big name author to read your book so you can put a quote from them on your book cover, that's going to be a different conversation than if you're just trying to get a bunch of people to do Amazon reviews for you. So you've got author reviewers, and you've got professional reviewers, and then you've got just people who like books who are willing to go leave reviews about them. And so the purpose of those reviews is slightly different, and what those will do for your book is slightly different, and where you get those is slightly different. So no matter who you are, you can send your book to people and be like, hey, if you liked this, post this on Amazon. Anybody can do that, and you don't have to mail physical copies to people. You can email them an ebook. That's super cheap. Anybody can make that happen. And Amazon does actually know that people know you, so you have to send it out to people a little more removed from you. You can't have your mom do it for you. But if you're sending it out to people who enjoy that genre and they're not your BFF or your husband or whoever, that part's super easy. And then for professional reviewers, you can find people who review books that you like just like when you're looking for a publisher and you go to the acknowledgments and you see, okay, this is the people who are involved in this book. Go to a book that you like and Google reviews of that book. There you go. Those are people who review the kind of stuff that you do. And then with authors, you always want to be really respectful. If you're asking somebody big name to read your book, oftentimes they do not have time to read an entire book. They do not have time to read all of the books in your whole series. So you got to be careful and be okay, this is the book that this author would be most useful for, and then ask them, okay, what can I give you? What do you need to know about this book in order to say nice things about it? Some authors, an outline and a sample of your writing, and okay, what do you want me to say about it? And okay, yeah, that sounds true, and they're good with that. You provide a lot of it for them. Some authors really want to do it themselves, and then that sounds force-feeding words in their mouth, and they hate that, and they don't want that. So you have to be very careful with what the author is comfortable with in order to promote your book, and you definitely let them decide how they want to review it. So,
Dave, what do you think?
Well, I haven't had to approach people a lot. My editor normally has done that. On a couple of books that I did do where I was indie published, I went ahead and contacted authors and I contacted professional reviewers, and I did it just as if I were pitching a book. I would give them the log line of the book, tell them a little bit about it. I didn't want to just give the log line. I also wanted to let them know that this was a book that was important to me. I selected my reviewers based upon most of the time based upon the blogs that they were running, the book blogs that they were running, and I would just check to the book blogs and see, are they running the kind of book that I'm doing? If I turn to a book blog and I've got a book reviewer who's doing all horror and I'm not writing a horror novel, I'd say, okay, that's not the person that I want to go to. And then I would send it off. Now, a lot of the book reviewers, a lot of the bloggers, probably only about a third of them jumped on it and actually did it quickly. Most of the time, time, you have to follow up about a month before the book review is done and say, have you had a chance to look at this yet? You know, and if they say, no, I absolutely hated it, that's okay. One of the things that you have to realize is that you can go out and make the very best, finest milkshake that you can. You'll go out and grind your own vanilla beans, and you'll go milk your own Jersey cows, and you'll mix in just the right amount of sugar and coconut oil or whatever you want in there, and you make the finest vanilla shake, and then you give it to somebody, and the reviewer say, that's great. Do you have any chocolate? Okay? And sometimes it's just a matter of taste, and so, you know, don't get too bent out of shape if that happens to you. And I've seen it happen many, many times. Reviewers that have reviewed your books before are more likely to review your books again. And so, you know, I noticed that I had one reviewer on Amazon. She was the #1 reviewer on Amazon, and she had liked some of my past books, and so I thought, oh, I'll just go ahead and send this book to her, even though it was an indie book, and she gave me a rave review, you know, no problem. And then she wrote, oh, and when you get another one done, send it to me too, you know. So I knew that, okay, I've got a fan.
Okay, this last part that Dave touched on is really, really interesting and important. It's building a relationship. I've probably reviewed between 500 and 1,000 books, okay? And those were ones where I actually took the time to give it a thoughtful review. I've read and didn't review double or triple that. Just for the whole purposes of, like, I'm going to do a review, not just I'm reading it for fun, because that's a whole different thing. Now, if someone like Dave sends me an email and says, hey, Steve, I'm Dave Farland. Well, you want to review my book? I go, well, yeah, you're Dave Farland. So sure. But there's a lot of people, there's a lot of authors, and this is very important. It's kind of the same thing like when you go to bookstores, if you have books in bookstores. You find someone who's sympathetic, who or maybe already likes your stuff, who likes the genre that you drive in. You approach them, give them your stuff. If that reviewer takes the time to read your book and review it and write the words down and review it and publish that means they legitimately liked your book or hated it if that's the review they left you. But it's important for you to understand the time commitment that the reviewer puts in for that.
You're asking a favor.
You are asking a favor. Yeah. Okay? When I first started Elitist Book Reviews, I only reviewed books that I'd already read because I didn't have any contacts yet, any official contacts yet. And then the first person I emailed was the editor over at a publisher called Pyre. At the time, that editor was Lou Anders. And I said, hey, Lou, I met you at a con back in the day, and you know, I'd really love to read some more stuff by your authors. He was a newer publisher at the time, and he said, well, sure, here's my catalog. Do you want everything? Okay. And I was dumb and stupid, and I went, I love books. Yes, send me everything. And so they came in like 3 or 4 boxes. And I started reviewing, and then Tor approached me and said, hey, you've been reading some of your reviews, and one of our authors, J.V. Jones, really likes you. So she wants you to review her next stuff. Can we send you everything? And I thought, everything? That sounds great. And so they sent me everything. And so there comes a point where you go, you have the stack of books on your nightstand, and it's like 10 high. Imagine a room of that. And that's what happens when you're a professional reviewer. So the very first thing you do is you start prioritizing. You say, what looks good? Who do I know? Who do I trust? And which book is the shortest? And that's not necessarily the order, but that's what guys like me start doing. Now, someone like Janci can come to me and say, hey, Steve, we've known each other forever. Can you do me a favor and read this book and review it for me? And I go, yeah, of course. You're Janci. I know you. I love you. Let's do it. And that's how I review Janci's first book, right? Even though it isn't my genre of preference, I read it and gave an impartial review, and it was a positive review, if I recall right.
Mm-hmm. Yes. It was very pleased. She hasn't punched you yet, so you're good.
I'm not dead yet. So But so many authors would send me feedback afterwards and say, hey, thank you for this review. Or editors would send me emails saying, thank you for this review. I appreciate it, yada, yada, yada. And that starts to start a relationship. And that's very, very important as a reviewer and as a writer. I'm a writer too. It's very important as a writer. So keep that kind of stuff in mind.
Can I add on to that?
No.
Yes. Do not approach someone who gives you a negative review and get angry with them. Even if you have petitioned them, don't. And I'm talking about this especially as from a reviewer's perspective. First off, I really would get irritated by people who would approach me and ask me to review a book, and they didn't actually look at my Goodreads was where I primarily worked, also on Amazon. And they wouldn't look at my reviews. My average review on Goodreads is 3 stars, because to me, an average book is 3 stars. But for most people, 3 stars is a negative review. And one of the reasons I stopped doing book reviews, because I got really tired of people getting angry with me because I didn't like their book. And I'm like, I liked it just fine. It was just average, though. It didn't stand out to me. And don't do that. I mean, every reviewer comes into a book with their own baggage, their own opinions, and their own perspectives, and that colors their experience within your book that may have nothing to do with what you are presenting to them as an author. And so, yeah, just don't. They give you a bad review or they don't review it at all, just let it go. Don't engage.
I would add to that the only appropriate response to a review is thank you, and can I send you the next book? There is nothing else you should ever say to anyone about a review.
Because I'm petty.
Well, and it's that relationship again. Even though you may not have a relationship with them, it's about being professional, and frankly, it's just petty and very juvenile to get upset over one person's review, and just let it go and move on, and that's okay. You know, it's negative reviews aren't necessarily the death knell of your book. It's nice to get lots and lots of positive reviews, but having negative reviews honestly sometimes validates positive reviews. Like, honestly, as a reader, I don't always trust books that only have 4 and 5 stars. I mean, you want to see some diversity there, because honestly, I find that if a book doesn't have any negative reviews, they tend to me be bland and hallmarky, like they're very light and fluffy and they're entertaining, but they're not necessarily what I'm looking for. So anyway. And
if you need to feel better about your reviews, one of the best things you can do is look up your favorite book and read all the 1-star reviews. It is hilarious and will make you feel so much better.
Some of the greatest books, like you look at great classics, you go on like Amazon or Goodreads, sometimes they only have like 3 stars or even less than that. Like I think of Remains of the Day is considered a modern classic novel. You go on Goodreads, it's got like a 2.5 or 3-star review, and it's because either people hate it or love it. And there's nothing in between, and yet it's this incredible piece of literature that people fawn over, and it won bazillion awards, been made into movie. It's
Or you hate it.
I actually hated it, but I'm trying to sound more artsy-fartsy. I loved it. It was brilliant.
I think all this talk about negative reviewers brings up kind of another point. When working with reviewers, don't research the one perfect person who's going to love your book and send that book only to them, because you have no control over how they feel about it. Maybe they're having a bad day. Maybe they just read a book that was very similar and this feels not exciting to them anymore, even though what you did was brilliant, and there just happens to be one other book that's ever done this before in the history of ever. There's just so many things that you don't have control over. So when working with reviewers, plan ahead to find lots of people. Some people are not going to have time. Some people are not going to respond. So just expect a lot of silence and a lot of negative reviews.
Yeah, when I was going to go on a blogging tour, I decided to set a goal of having 50 reviews on a blogging tour. And, that takes a pretty big amount of time and effort. But on doing that blogging tour, I probably approached 250 people just to get the 50, okay? And so I think you've got to shoot wide every time.
Yeah, I was just trying to look up my own stats, actually, because I have kept it very detailed notes about who I've sent it to. And on average, on my first book, I sent it out to 60 reviewers because I was a newbie and frankly, it takes a lot of time to do the proper research. And only about 6 of them responded. Of those 6, only maybe about 3 actually got around to reviewing it. There's a lot of them that will take it on and then just never get around to it. And so honestly, of those 60 reviewers that I contacted, 3 of them gave me reviews, and that, so it's
That's about the same as my experience.
yeah, it's not easy, especially if you're an unknown author and you're a newbie.
Yeah, I should mention that, this was well over my 50th book, so they kind of knew who I was.
Yeah, a little bit of name recognition there goes a long way. Yeah.
All right, let's go ahead and open it up for you guys to ask questions. Yeah.
What kind of reviews are you most looking for? Is there a certain thing that's written there that you would like to have?
There's 2 kinds of reviews. Some people will review the book, and some people will review the author. And they might say something about you that's, good in general, like, the finest author that ever lived. And you can use that on other books. And so I typically would like to see a balance where they are short, pithy, and review both my book and me, okay, so that I can have a little bit of everything. And when I say short and pithy, 3 sentences is great.
As a reviewer, I try never to review the author.
Mm-hmm. Those are harder to get.
Unless, so for example, an author named Tom Lloyd, he's a British author, great guy. And he and I became friends over the course of reviewing his books. And there were a few times where, and I've done this with Larry as well, there were a few times when in the reviews that I've written, I said, this guy is one of the nicest guys you'll ever meet, and you can tell that this author puts in the work and the preparation and this and that. And what that does is, there's a little bit of mind games I'm playing there. I'm telling other readers, not you, I'm telling other readers that this author's cool. It's all right. This is a good author. Overlook some of the perceived weaknesses and read the dang book. But I try never to do that because more often than not, when someone reviews the author, it's in a negative light. And that's, as a reviewer, that's super unprofessional. That's my opinion on that.
You don't have anything to add on that?
In the back, yeah.
Just pulling a question here from the session description. Should you pay or otherwise incentivize?
Hell no.
With a free copy is okay.
That's it.
That's it.
That is it.
It's against, for Amazon, it's against the rules.
Is it the FCC? Who is it?
I don't know. As far as I know, it's just...
There is a law against
There's
it.
a law. It's against the law to pay your reviewers.
Yeah, the only way a reviewer should ever receive any sort of compensation in terms of money is if there is ad revenue on their site, that they get paid for clicks or Amazon affiliate links or whatever.
But that's their own...
But that's their own thing. Do not ever pay a reviewer. Okay? Remember, your job as an author is to get paid, not to pay. Okay?
Like a Curtis review.
Screw those guys.
Does Curtis charge? I don't know the answer.
Yes, they do.
Expensive.
You can get indie books reviewed on Kirkus for $175 roughly.
Really?
And you know what? I have read a lot of Kirkus reviews for books that I have read and reviewed, and I can tell that their reviewers are not reading the books. And I have sent them many an email correcting their reviews, saying, you obviously didn't read. I did this for one of Larry's books, actually. I sent them a very, very nasty email saying, hey, you know all the stuff that's in this review, and you guys are super popular. All of it's wrong, factually, not opinion, factually. all the stuff that's mentioned, it's not in here. So I personally, as a reviewer and as an author, this is my soapbox, I'm so sorry, I put 0 respect or trust in Curtis. But I'm sure it's great for other people.
I would also recommend steering clear of actually sending hard copies because that can add up very quickly. In fact, I think almost every single review I didn't get was people I actually sent hard copies to. And between shipping and the actual copy of the book and everything, it gets really expensive, especially when you're starting out and you're not making money off your books in the beginning, which I hate to break it to you is how it's going to go. And honestly, now I won't even send to a reviewer or anyone if they're wanting a hard copy book, because it's just, and I know that some reviewers are only work in hard copy, and that's fine, but just for my own costs and overhead, that, honestly, I get plenty of organic reviews now that I don't really hunt down reviewers anyway, but honestly, I would just caution, especially for the newbies who are starting out, it gets very pricey, very expensive, and it adds up very quickly. That, I probably spent $100 trying to send out a handful of books that didn't lead to anything.
But if your publisher does it for you,
that's true.
And nobody will fault you if they're like, oh, I only review copies of, physical books. And you're like, oh, well, I don't send out physical books. And nobody's feelings are offended. You're not going to burn any bridges. You're not looking unprofessional or anything. You don't have to let someone guilt you into it. You're totally good to say no, and no one will think anything of that.
As long as you don't call them stupid or, curse at them, then,
Don't do that to the reviewer.
So I'm just going to kind of, throw this out there. I personally like hardcovers, and it feels more solid and real. And I think that it's important to have a nice presentation of your book. And so I like to send hard copies if I can. Yeah, that's all I want to say. I always set aside a little bit of a budget for advertising my book, and that budget typically goes to sending out my hard copies, sending out personal letters in the old days. Now it's all just emails and stuff like that. But you also have to budget your time and say, I'm only going to spend, 3 days maybe looking at possible reviewers or something. That would be a lot of time, actually, for me to spend. I'm more like 3 hours, or I have my assistant do it or something.
When you say hard copies, are you talking hard copies? Or
Paperback.
Printed
copies.
solid book.
I'm talking hardcover books is what I like to send.
Wow.
And I've gone so far as to do a print run of hard copy books just so that I could make sure that I could get the hard copies to the reviewers.
Yeah. And again, I think that a lot of that too is just your personal preference and your own experience. For him, it's been a good experience. For me, it hasn't been. And frankly, I am an ebook person. I hate paperback books now, and I know that's just sacrilegious, but I got rid of all of my books. I don't own a book now other than on my Kindle, but that's just my preference. Sorry, I know. But I'm sorry. I had 2,000 books in my house. It was, try moving with that. Yeah.
But
To
the
me,
thing
it
is,
depends on who I'm sending to, right? If I'm sending a book to Steve and he's my friend and very likely to review it and he has this enormous reach, I've had people say to me, oh, I heard of your book on Elitist Book Reviews. I'll send him a hard copy, no problem. Somebody who has a random blog on the internet who might like my book can have a Mobi file, right? Because they're very unlikely to review my book and it needs to not cost me anything.
yeah, and you should ask which they prefer too. I always say, do you want an ebook or would you like a hard copy? And yeah.
Again, think of the relationship that you're trying to establish. There's an author whose name that some of you may have heard of. His name is Robert McCammon. He's one of the top horror authors ever. And I met him at a con, and I said, hey, I'm Steve Diamond. I'm a big fan. He's like, yeah. And I said, yeah, I run Elitist Book Reviews. It's a book review site. And he stopped and looked at me and he went, this was 2 years after this book had come out that I've reviewed. He went, you reviewed my book called The Five. And I loved your review because you said this, this, and this. I went, oh, okay.
That's a good moment. Yeah.
And if you know me, Robert McCammon's my hero.
Yeah.
So one of the best authors ever. And so he said, have you gotten a reader copy of my next book coming out? And I said, well, no, not yet. And he goes, that's unacceptable. I will send you one personally when I get home from World Horror. And he sent me one personally when he got home from World Horror. That's a very different thing. Okay? And I've had a number of authors that have sent me something where I loved their book. And so the next time their book came out, I got a package from them. It was a hard copy, like Dave was saying. And it was signed. And it was to me.
Yeah.
And guess what? Even if that book had weaknesses, it was damn good.
And you know what? A lot of times you'll have an editor, if you're working with a big publishing house, your editor may be in charge of getting the books out. And they say, oh, we're going to be sending 50 books out. And they may not send it to the reviewers that they should have. And so you want to take responsibility and say, okay, did you get copies to these 3 people or something? And then you send them the personal copy. You just say, send the books to me. I will send them and sign them and send them to those people.
Yeah, again, the relationship. Yeah.
Are there any limitations on like how or where you can use quotes from a review? Like the review's copyrighted, right? So is there any limitation on that?
Every time that I was ever, anytime I've ever seen my name personally on a cover for like an author cover quote, or one of my reviews as a review cover quote, or like on the website cover quote or something like that, I have every single time been asked permission. And I think that is a very good way to live. Ask permission. Because look, even if I love your freaking book, sometimes, it's just nice when someone acknowledges that you took the time to review it and said, dude, I loved your book. Or I loved your review of my book. Can I use that? The answer is always going to be yes. But ask the question, please, always.
That counts if you're hiring like freelance editors to work on your book and they send you nice comments. Check with them if you have permission to use those. I have heard a lot of editors have gotten their words stolen out of context and used as reviews on the front cover of people's books, that they were not actually saying a nice thing if you'd read the whole sentence. So anybody who is talking about your book, ask anybody for permission to use that in a place where you're putting their name on it, because that's their reputation. So be respectful of that.
And even if I had a very jarring experience where there was a book written by a really good friend of mine that his previous book I had raved about on my blog because I love his series. And then when the next book came out, my name was there was a quote for me on the book. And I was a little bit offended because I was like, I would have given you, I didn't know where it came from. I had no idea. And so I was like, I would have given you a cover quote if you'd asked me. And it took me about a year to be over it and to feel like I could say something without and treat it like a joke. And I was like, where did that even come from? And he was like, oh, my publisher did that. The publisher had gone to my blog, pulled the quote. I didn't even know that's where it came from. And I thought that was super unprofessional. This is a big publisher. They should not have done that. All they needed to do was send me an email. And I would have said, hey, that's not that great a quote. Let me give you something better because I want to promote the book, but I wanted to be asked.
And I think if you, I use a lot of my, reviews that I get on my website, because I'll have my book there with a buy link and the, synopsis, and I'll have a whole bunch of the reviews so that they're right there. And I always link to the blogs. I always link to wherever you can actually find it so that it also does give a little of a bump to the book reviewers, and if the people want to read more, they can read more on that. But that, to me, I think that's a nice way to give them a little extra thank you of I'm helping to drive traffic to your website too.
All right, thank you guys so much for attending and being so respectful to our audience.